this video, we're going to make a stunning snow scene using Unreal Engine. Let's get into it. Right, so now that the modeling's done, we've got Unreal Engine open, and we're going to just make a new file. And we're going to call it Snow Scene, and we're going to just use a blank architecture template. You'll notice this is version 5.2, brand new. What we're going to do is start with a little bit of admin. Let's create some new folders. So one for our level, one for our bespoke materials. We'll largely use Megascans, but we'll still create some of our own. And another one for datasmith. Now, actually, with that in mind, let me just crack that back open, the model. While waiting for that to load, let's create a new level. Call it Snow Scene. Let's just jump into that. Change it to unlit, just so we can see our geometry. So here's our basic model. We're not going to win any awards for SketchUp modeling with this, but hopefully this will give you a good insight into how to create a really nice snowy environment in Unreal Engine. So let's go on extensions, datasmith, export. Let's make a folder there. We may export other items, so we use the same folder. So let's just export Snow House into there. Jump back into Unreal, and then just with the little add, hit File Import, and then we select our folder and we just import geometry and materials. There we go. That's the reason why I went for unlit. Let's just speed the camera up. Right. And a couple of things to load in. Number one is ultra dynamic sky. You'll notice a couple of other ones there. Just had a little bit of preparation beforehand just to check a few things. So we add that one. And then you've got this winter environment nature pack. Now, by the way, both of those are paid assets. Just tell it whatever version, it doesn't really make a difference. Add to project. So yeah, just a little heads up there that they are paid assets, but my stance on paid assets is that if you're going to take this stuff seriously, I think you're going to have to prepare for a bit of that, because the better quality assets and 3D models and all that sort of stuff, in my opinion, are the ones that are paid. Right, and then a folder up here for geometry, and that's going to be our main folder for geometry. Right, and then if we go back to our content, we'll see that we've got Angry Mesh must be the makers. So we've got our nature pack in there, our winter pack, and then we've got our ultra dynamic sky. If we drag the sky into the scene, we can then go back to lit mode, and there we are. This thing is absolutely incredible. we can set the time of day to be a bit later, so it's a lower number. That do something like 600. That's quite nice. You know what? We'll leave it on 600, and then we can lift our fog. I'm just using the keyboard there just to test single increments. So that'll do us for now in terms of the atmosphere, but there's a bit more to do, but that little starting point. Then we want to go to Quixel Bridge, and by the way, what I'm doing here is I'm just getting the thing set up and just masked in for now. Now I've got a few things that I've downloaded ahead of time. I wouldn't mind just testing a few of these other embankments. So then what I'm doing is I'm just loading in all these little assets. That's quite nice as well, isn't it? And all these are creating little folders in our project. And then what we want to do is basically kit bash all of these assets to create our ground plane, our surface. Let's just point back to the reference image as well. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to just see which of these embankments is the best one. Let's just go for that one. Hit space to change the mode there between scale, rotate and move. And what I want to do is I want to just scale it up. And if you hold Alt, drag, I tend to just turn the snaps off as well, just so I've got maximum control. Okay, so we've got our initial little setup there, right? Then what we want to do is we want to create a camera so we know what view to work to. For the purpose of this exercise, we're just going to replicate this image. If you were to take other views, obviously you've got to give a bit more consideration to your backdrop. So little burger menu on the end. Create camera here. Cine camera actor. Let me just create another folder as well. And we're going to call this environment. another folder called landform, and that's the obviously the landform. Another folder for cameras. Your scene can very quickly get away from you if you don't get in the habit of that. Right, and then focal length. .20 is a good one for this sort of shot. Let's just slow that back down to 1. Okay, that'll do us. And then you just want to make sure that that is perfectly on 90 or minus 90. And then the other two are perfectly on 0 as well. So we've got a nice, what looks like a nice 2-point perspective. And then see the way the horizon is roughly in the middle. So we're just going to just lift that. And then what we want to do is right click, transform, and then lock actor movement, just so we don't fall out of position. Then just want to see what else have we got to make our environment. So see the way you can just sneak that in, and that creates just a bit more variety to the landscape. But what we need is a bigger surface. Let's see if this gives us it. I don't think so. Let's go in environments. Huge snow pile. Hopefully that's gonna give us something. So this is nice for the backdrop here, something like that. Just to frame the shot. If we just go back in, see what I mean? It just gives a bit of something to the background. Okay, this might be what we're after. Now this will be quite low resolution given the scale that I've set it at, so we will have to add more information, more detail in the foreground, just to make that look more and more convincing. But it's at least give us our base. Let's jump out of the camera. So then what we can do is we can use the other embankments then. So just disguise some of these clumsier areas. Not too convinced by that one. You can see how you can work that up anyway with that. I don't want to spend too much time right now. I will complete that, but I'll do that in a little sped up section. Right, then just go back to the camera. So you can see there how that's already added more information in. Then what we want to do is we want to jump into our winter environment, meshes. Oh, this is nice. Little background. Let's pop a mountain in. Oh, now we're talking. Look at that. You want it to be far enough away so the fog is impacting it, but I think that looks fantastic. And then some of these little winter grasses, they're very good. We'll use them. Little props are good as well. We've got little steps. Maybe. Just for those little we could almost mimic something like that, couldn't we? And isn't, you know, this is great that you can just have a little play with setting your projects in such fascinating setups. Now you can see that repetition there, so I'm not gonna continue on that basis. I will revisit that. It's really nice, just just setting the, as I say, just setting the scene. And obviously what we're here for are the trees. So I want to start with the backdrop trees. These are all animated as well, which is great for your cinematics. I'll just drag a couple of others in. And then just a couple in the foreground. Seem to be, really sizable trees, don't they, on the shot? So we're gonna kind of work to that. And just that little bit of variety in foreground and background just makes everything look a bit more interesting. Don't want it dominating the shot, so there we go. That's quite nice. You can see how you can just build up the environment by just continuing to add assets and just staying patient with that process. That little key shortcut then was F, by the way, to just zoom in on the selected object. maybe just rotate that a touch just so it's, there we go, just so it's interacting with the landscape a little bit neater. That's quite interesting. As you can see, you can build this up to your heart's content. And create something absolutely fantastic. So I'll leave that there for now. I will add more assets. But one thing before I just jump into speed the video up is let's just load in some materials. So collections, ArcViz, surfaces. I'm going to want a metal. I'm going to want a veneer, a timber, a lovely stacked slate, and it looks like it's got like a corrugated facade. So if I just type in corrugated surface, and there is that one there, but to give me an easy life, is there a vertically laid one? Let's go for that. High quality. Let's add that in. So now, where are we? Megascans, surfaces. There we are. Drop that on. Now it always comes in tiny if you don't map it in SketchUp. And SketchUp hasn't really got the natural kind of ability for that, so a good save is to just just getting everything organised. A good save is to just mess with the tiling and just reduce it to 0.01. I think is a good starting point. Maybe 0.05. Let's just turn the roughness down so it's more shiny. There we go. There's something a bit funky going on there, and it's because the parent material isn't two-sided. If you do two-sided, it kind of forces the removal of a back-facing bit of geometry. so it doesn't like just disappear. Another thing on appearance as well is that if you have that selected, the material you want to replace it with, you can then replace the appearance of a material and it mass changes that material in the scene, which is very handy. .01. The glass, I just want to use our starter content. And then we've just got a nice standard glass there, that'll do. We'll fine tune that in a bit to get that weird bending effect there. And then here we want to use our brushed steel. Like so. And then we want to tint the albedo, which is the colour. So we've got that nice black frame. Some of these other assets that are already textured, they're not perfect, but they might just work given the distance of the camera. I've no idea what that is. I'm just making sure that the parent is two-sided. We've got our nice games room there. Okay, so that's a little start on the textures. Obviously, again, we will develop those. Another folder for artificial lighting. We're going to drop in a spotlight. Let's go into top view. And obviously we're just copying these through. By the way, select them all and set them to movable. So it's not asking us to build any light. Movable keeps it all dynamic. Okay, if we then jump back into our camera, let's make these really warm lights. Boost the intensity. And you can see that in our camera, it's quite sorry, go back to perspective. It's quite underexposed. Now, what I want to do is drag in a post-process volume, which is kind of it's basically the master controller of the scene. Set that to unbound, so it affects the whole scene. And I think already it's give us a bit of exposure. Now, I don't know whether is the camera overruling that. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Where are we? I like to mess with toe and slope, it just adds a bit of realism. And then for now, what I'm looking for is a bit of colour grading in terms of the temperature. Or can we do that in here now? Let's have a look. Yeah. So nice, cool. I mean, if I do like, yeah. So that's quite nice. You can see the way we're just getting that near enough, the match on that. And then let's increase the spread. So they start to influence the landscape, see that? Just hit G to turn all the icons off. Oh, that's looking quite interesting so far. What we do need is a bit more fog though. Still think like, you know, everything's a bit too clear, isn't it? Yeah, that's better. So it's, yeah, it looks like 10's the highest. Let's just keep it to 9 then. So you're just getting a little indication that the mountain's there. Let me just jump out the camera. Let's just bring that a little bit closer in. Just make sure we can see it through there. I think that's very interesting. Now, is there any other settings we can have a little play with? That's quite nice. just leave it though for now. I think there are more advanced fog settings. One of my favourite things about Unreal as well is that it's got that kind of revert to the default. I do like that. Just in case you make a bit of an error. Right, here we go. Fog colour intensity. Let's crank it up so we get 10. Fog, base, fog, there we go, look at that. Just lift that a little bit, just gives us just a bit more realism, I think, with just that little bit of increased density. It's obviously too much. And can we just play with the height of it? Base height. You know, I think we'll leave it at that. I think that's certainly doing a job. It would be nice to just drop the intensity of the lighting a little bit. So that's looking nice. If we zoom in now, you're starting to see something really interesting now, I think. So okay, let me finish the texturing, finish adding assets to the scene, and then we'll add some finishing touches, and then we'll talk about render settings and things like that. One last thing before we then move into render settings. We're actually going to avoid using the path trace in this instance. We're going to use Lumen only. and the settings that are within the post-process volume and a little bit of variables that we'll add in the render settings. But anyway, before we get to that, what I've done is I've imported a series of asset packs that you can get from the Epic Marketplace. Some of them are free, some of them are paid for. What I encourage you to do is browse the marketplace and the category architectural visualization, and it's endless. Some of it's quite cheap as well if it's paid, and so it's absolutely endless for these useful packs. And what I want to do here is add in bits of decoration, just little tiny bits like this, nothing too strenuous, just something like that. When you use the asset libraries within Unreal and the Epic ecosystem, they're always pre-textured and they react better. See the way they were like sticking to the wall and you're scaled correctly and all that sort of stuff. So I would encourage you to have a little go at using these libraries. They are amazing. So it just adds a bit more character to the scene. Maybe just a couple of bigger ones in here. Trying not to mess with the scale too much as they come in. Just in case the textures start misbehaving. So something like that will do. It's not exactly how you decorate it, but you get the idea. And then there are other little packs like coffee table sets. Always go into the meshes folder. And they're just some brilliant little examples like that. Again, it just adds a bit more depth to the scene. I've got additional shelves as well, so let's just see what this looks like. You can see how you can spend days working these sorts of things up. That's one great thing about Unreal, is that the actual inbuilt library is somewhat endless because you can use the marketplace. I was a little critical of that in my comparison video recently. That was more to do with speed. When you've got the time to build this sort of finesse in, then it's hard to beat. And then I think I've brought in these lovely sculptural type armchairs. Sometimes the geometry takes a little while to load in because it's quite complex. So I'll just stop it there and I'll come back when it's loaded in. So that's loaded in. I might just scale it up a touch. And then maybe just a little coffee table in between. Where are we? I have had a little issue with these. Don't know why one's gone missing all of a sudden. I'm struggling to select it, so I've just selected from the outline. It's not the end of the world. Let's just add something interesting on top of there. Now, I may have needed to put a surface on that, but we won't see from the distance the camera is at. Okay, and then one last one that I did bring in was these very interesting lights. Look at all them. You can actually get to a point where you could just model a shell, really. Just use all these assets. Look at that, pre-texture and everything. Just something to go over the snooker table like that. Maybe something over the dining table, maybe something quite snazzy again. Now this has gone from cabin in the woods to footballers' wives escape, I must admit. Don't know whether I'd decorate it in this sort of way, but I'm just demonstrating the power of the marketplace. Let's go for one more in here. There we go. If we then jump back to the camera, you can then see that we've got a very interesting property in a set in a lovely snowy scene. You can see they populated it with tons of assets just to add a bit of story to the shot. You know, it sort of feels like it's a little bit abandoned. Maybe this one gets lived in, you know, one or 2 weeks a year, so it needs a little bit of tidy. You know, love the animation in the trees. You can just see the mountain just very faintly in the distance. So I think we've composed a really nice shot here, and we've obviously worked the thing up. So let's move into render settings. Before we jump into the post-process volume, I do just want to create another folder call that assets, and then we're going to just drag all the stuff that we've dropped into the scene into there. Just keeps everything nice and tidy. Right, so we're just going to do a quick run through now of the settings that I typically tweak and what have you. So in Bloom, you change the method to convolution, and then you want to turn it down something like 0.2, maybe 0.4. But subtlety is key in these matters. Exposure, we've been leaving that within the camera anyway, so we'll leave that one out. Lens flare, 0.1 at most. Then I was looking for film there, so slope. Oh, that might. We'll leave that one for the camera as well then. Let's just see if. Yeah, so the temperature's still being affected. I did like the cool look. Can we go even further actually? No, let's do 4,500. And then these are good, these global settings where you can reduce the saturation a little bit. I think I will. Just 0.9. Little contrast boost. Tiny bit more gamma, maybe just 1.1 actually. And in the shadows, in gain, you just want to lift them because you just want to see a bit more detail. So let's just do 1.8. Maybe just drop the highlight. So gain is the one where you control strength. You can see the highlights within the property. Let's just do 0.9. Don't go too mad with that. Right, and then the bad boy settings. The global illumination method here is Lumen, and this is a recent addition, or a fairly recent addition to Unreal Engine in their 5th release. And this is just a new way of calculating dynamic global illumination, and it's absolutely amazing. So what we've got the ability to do is affect the level of quality. So in here, we've got lighting quality. If you just crank that up to 2, the scene detail, we'll crank that up all the way. I'm just pulling the sliders to the max basically. 4, and then the final gather quality is 2. They're the maximum there. You can improve that with a key entry, but I think we're gonna just let the slider do the talking there. They're quite simply quality settings. Then in the reflections, we want to do quality, drag that to 2. We want the mode to be hit lighting for reflections, and a fairly new addition here is high quality translucency. That gives us, see if you turn that on and off, see where it goes a bit dull, you turn it on, you've got lovely crisp reflections. So that is our post-process settings. We can then jump in the camera. I mentioned about, right, so that's because I've adjusted them here. So slope and toe, it's nice to just reduce, even though I've added contrast in the main, just sliding that to the left just makes it feel a little bit more cinematic. And then the exposure settings, I do prefer to do them in, let's just type it, in the camera, because each camera's got a different viewpoint, and I don't think there's a universal way of doing that camera by camera, so I do it individually. I think 11 is spot on. Okay. Now, before we render something off, there's one thing I wanted to do. And that is add in a little bit of snow. So, down here, where we've got our ultra dynamic sky, go on blueprints and drag in ultra dynamic weather. It's then got presets at the very top, and we just want to go for snow. We don't want to go for full on blizzard. If you then go in the camera and just select away, you can just see that. I mean, how amazing is that? So that'll create a little bit of interest on a still image, but then think of the opportunities when it comes to an animation. Now, one thing we need to be mindful of is if we go inside the property. So if I just turn this back to rain for a sec, because it's a bit easier to see. Right, it's raining inside, and what that's to do with is something called collision. Now this is a gaming term, and collision is, it allows like a character in a game to bump into a wall and stuff like that. So we need to add collision to our model for the rain and the snow to understand what it should be hitting and stopping at. So to achieve that, you click on the object and then double click on the static mesh there. And then in the drop down here, collision, we just want to add a simplified box. Hit save, and then you can see the raindrops hitting the surface. And then we're back in here, let's go. So let's change that back to snow. And you can see the snow now landing on that surface as well. That is amazing. And that'll obviously help with the still image not hitting the, well, not going inside the building, basically. Last but not least is, let's create a lovely render. So what we want to do is we want to do new folder, and we want to create a sequence. A sequence is what the movie render queue reads in terms of a camera position, camera movement and stuff, and it uses that to then render from. So we create a folder, and then we do add new level sequence, and we'll call this main shot. We then go to our lovely organized outliner here. Let's make a new folder. Sequences, drag that in there. Go to our cameras, and then we want to drag that into here. And then you can see we've got a full list of frames there. You can then animate the position from start to finish, and then that would create little camera movements and things like that. And you can animate the weather and everything. There's so much, but for now we're just going to focus on a still image. So we've got our camera dragged into the sequence, and then now what we can do is go Window, Cinematics, Movie Render Queue, and then that should now appear here, main shot. Then we want to create our config, our render settings, and one great thing, or another great thing, is there are many. Another great thing about Unreal Engine is its documentation. So I will leave a link to this in the description below. Now this more relates to a ray tracing method, but we can still pull out some key details to get a top quality render. So first things first, let's swap the JPEG sequence for a PNG sequence. That's just a higher quality image. Then we want to add anti-aliasing. That's how you pronounce it. And then we just want to copy this off. So we'll give it a warm up. Count of 120, 120. And then see where it's got 1 and 64. So 64 for the temporal sample count. And then the override is ticked as well. So that's all we need to do for that bit. And then what we then want to do is use these console variables to dictate render settings during the render process. So if we added this information into the scene, it would blow your computer up. But we can just tell the render itself to pick up on these. Now I'm only going to focus on these top ones because we're not using ray tracing, we're using Lumen. That's a slightly different bit of tech, so we're just using these top ones. Now the great thing with this documentation is you can just copy and paste it. So what I've done here is I've copied and pasted a few in, and then I've just added 2 more of my own. This is from experience, but you can obviously just pause the video now, or I might even just paste these below in the description. So in order to insert these, we then add a setting, and then add a console variable there. We then select the first bit, paste that in. It gives you, well, actually, I think there's a new addition. It gives you a little bit of a guide, and then you just hit 4. Let's add another. Love that it gives you that little bit of that little preview now. It never used to do that. Just gives you that confidence that you're typing in the right way, and the any typo on these, and it won't register. It can be a bit fiddly. Or we should have just used Notepad actually. Word is trying to spell check it. So tone mapper quality, that's a key one. Set that to 5. The other one is then sharpen. Let's just try that. Let's just change that to sharpen. Yeah, well that's good. See the way it gives you the option there. So you swap that for sharpen. That's brilliant there. And then r.screen percentage is a very clever tool. What it does is it renders it. So 200%, it renders it twice the size, and it scales it back down to your chosen resolution, which adds tons of sharpness, but not so much so that it looks fake. Then for your output, I'm just going to keep it at the 1080p, but you can crank that up to 2K, 4K, and so on. And then if you want to use this for a single image, you want to use you want to tick use custom playback range, and then you just pick 2 numbers that are side by side, so just 8 and 9. And the reason I've not done 0 and 1 is it just gives it a little chance to get into the sequence a little bit. Sometimes you get little bugs at the start of a sequence, so you just give it a little chance to get into that sequence. And that's it. We accept. Actually, you know what? Before we do, let's save this as a render preset. Create a new folder. Render presets. Let's do something like lumen, render settings underscore 1080p. Doesn't like spaces, Unreal Engine, so you need to use underscores. So we've saved that as a preset, accept, and then you can see the way to change the name of it there. Let me just change the location. Something like output. shot. You can see there it's then changed the location. If we hit render local, it gives you a little preview and it tells you, how long it's going to take and all that sort of stuff. So, okay, let's let that render, and then we'll review the results together. So we're all rendered, and I must admit I was a bit naughty there. I did just crank up the resolution to 4K, just because my monitor's quite high resolution, so I wanted to make sure it was coming through right. And I think particularly under the time we've spent, I think that's quite a nice image. Nothing too difficult, very simple SketchUp model. We've kit bashed a handful of assets together and tweaked some settings. If we go back to our reference image, it's not a bad effort at all, if I do say so myself. Now I am tempted, actually, to just round this off with a little bit of Photoshop, because what I think it lacks is just a little bit of contrast. Now, we can do that in Unreal Engine. So if I just drag this down a little bit. Jump in no, it wasn't here, wasn't it? So if we go in our global settings, we could double. I mean, look at that. Look how dramatic that is. I don't know whether that would hurt the render too much. So let's just drag in this shot and then just give it a little bit of camera raw filter. And I quite like as well, see the way we've got the snow in the foreground with that bit of motion blur. I just think that makes it look so much more realistic. So I think maybe cool it off a little bit again. And then just dial up, look at that. Actually, maybe we just keep it neutral, actually. The fact that this is a 4K image now as well doesn't hurt the the post-production. Just a tiny bit of sharpening there. So you can see straight away how that's boosted the shot. And then I've just done Control J for duplicate. And I'm going to use one of these cinematic presets. I love them. I'm going to go for something a bit bold, maybe something like that. And then just set it to 50%. Layer, flatten. Sorry, forgive the noise. So there we go. Nice snow scene in Unreal Engine. Very quick render time there, I should say as well. And obviously the perfect opportunity to create lovely animations as well. So hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was useful. And I'll catch you on the next one.